Tess stood at the navigation console, the cold metal cold against her palms, her breath coming in shallow, controlled bursts. Outside the viewport, the toxic storm churned with a relentless fury, swirling clouds of noxious green and grey twisting like monstrous serpents against the fragile silhouette of the floating city. The acrid scent of chemical decay assaulted her senses, mingling with the metallic tints of the scrap that composed their home. It was Tess's moment, the trial she had awaited since joining the crew. Mira's voice cut sharply through the howl of the wind, steadying and fierce. "Tess, the storm's shifting east. Adjust course, 20 degrees starboard. Steady." Tess nodded, heart pounding with the weight of responsibility. Her fingers danced across the controls, recalibrating sensors and adjusting the city's rudder. Every decision mattered. One wrong move could send them spiraling into the toxic depths below. The city groaned under the assault. Steelbone's patchwork hull creaked and strained, bolts rattling loose, and loose scraps clattered like thunder on the upper decks. The mechanical beasts that usually patrolled the outskirts had vanished. Even they feared the tempest. Yet the storm was not the only enemy. The crew's fragile trust was tested as tensions simmered beneath the surface. Inside the engine room, Kael and Grav fought a different battle. Sparks flew as Grav tightened a brace on the weakened hydraulic systems, sweat mixing with grime on his scarred face. "We're holding, but just barely," Grav muttered, voice low and grim. Kael's eyes flicked to the monitors, then back to the battered machinery. "Keep at it. Every second counts." Meanwhile, Lena moved through the cramped quarters like a calming breeze. Her fingers brushed over a young crew member's bruised arm, her soft voice weaving hope into the heavy air. "We're stronger than this storm. We have to be." Back on deck, Myra's fiery hair was plastered to her face, eyes sharp as she coordinated the crew's efforts. Her respect for Tess was clear, though she masked it behind a strict demeanor. "You've got this, Tess. Don't let the storm see you falter." The hours dragged on. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the floating city's patchwork metal in ghostly flashes. The toxic sea below hissed and bubbled, a constant reminder of the deadly abyss waiting should they fail. Tess's hands moved with growing surety, her earlier nerves replaced by a steely resolve. She recalled lessons Mira had drilled into her, reading the patterns of the toxic clouds, anticipating shifts in wind and pressure, trusting instinct sharpened by countless hours of observation. Each adjustment brought them closer to safety. Suddenly, a violent jolt rocked Steelbone, sending loose tools and scrap flying. Tess's heart leaped, but she held firm, countering the city's sway with precise commands. "Hold steady, we're almost through." A final surge of effort from Kael and Grav reinforced the engines, the hum of power rising against the storm's rage. Then, as if the sea itself sighed in relief, the clouds began to thin, the toxic winds subsiding to a cautious whisper. Exhausted but triumphant, the crew gathered on the deck, faces streaked with grime and sweat. Mira clapped Tess on the shoulder, her sharp green eyes shining with approval. "You earned your place today. No more doubts." Kael approached, his weathered face breaking into a rare, approving smile. "You have the crew's trust now, Tess. We'll need it all going forward." Lena offered a gentle smile, her presence a soothing balm. "And remember, we're all here for each other. No one faces the storm alone." As the city drifted beyond the last remnants of the tempest, the crew's unity felt stronger. Their found family forged anew in the crucible of survival. Yet Tess knew this was only the beginning. Greater challenges awaited beyond the horizon, and the storm within and without had only just begun to stir. The night stretched on, silent but for the steady rhythm of Steelbone's engines and the quiet murmur of a crew ready to face whatever the toxic sea would throw at them next. Tess stood at the prow, eyes fixed on the distant dark waters, her heart steady with fierce, bittersweet determination. "Whatever comes," she whispered to the wind, "we survive, together." And with that vow, the floating city sailed onward into the unknown. Old Marek, the venerable historian of Steelbone, settled into his worn seat, the creak of wood a quiet herald of the tales to come. His gnarled hands clasped a battered leather-bound book, the pages yellowed and brittle, a relic of a time before the city had even begun its drift on the toxic sea. "Listen well," Marek began, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of years and storms weathered. "This sea, this endless, churning wasteland, was not always so merciless. There were days when the waters sparkled beneath twin suns, when cities rose tall and proud on solid ground, their engines humming with promise. But greed, pride, and folly brought ruin. Mechanical beasts, once tools of progress, turned hunters in the night, tearing through flesh and steel alike. The crew hung on his every word, the flickering light illuminating the lines of worry and hope alike. Kael sat forward, his sharp eyes reflecting the flickering flames, his mind racing through memories of loss and the burden of command. Mira's fiery gaze softened, her usual defiance yielding to the gravity of history. Joran, clutching a worn schematic, traced the faded lines as Merrick weaved his narrative, the ancient tech interlaced with myth and warning. The Warden, Merrick continued, was once a guardian, charged with maintaining the balance between man and machine, sea and sky. But loss twisted his heart, and he became a tyrant, commanding legions of mechanical beasts to enforce his will. His shadow stretches far, and his knowledge of the artifact is both a threat and a key. A hush fell, broken only by the distant murmur of the toxic sea lapping against Steelbone's patchwork hull. Lena's gentle hands moved with practiced care as she tended to Myra's scraped arm. The soft hiss of herbal salves mixing with the low hum of Marek's voice. The room, though small and worn, felt like a sanctuary of fragile haven where stories and scars were shared in equal measure. Joran's fingers trembled slightly as he connected Merrick's tales to the cryptic diagrams he had uncovered. "This artifact," he whispered, "it's not just a tool or a relic. It's a piece of the sea's lost balance, a hope that we can restore what was broken. But to wield it, we must understand the past and face the dangers that still guard it." Kael nodded slowly, the weight of leadership pressing heavier with each revelation. "We carry their legacy now," he said quietly, "and the fate of Steelbone depends on us seeing it through." Outside, the toxic sea roared, an eternal reminder of the peril that surrounded them. Yet within the fragile walls of their floating refuge, the crew found strength in shared history. In the stories that bound them to a past they could neither forget nor escape. As Marek's voice trailed into silence, the room held a collective breath, poised on the edge of a new dawn forged in courage, unity, and the fierce, bittersweet determination to survive. Even as shadows lengthened and the sea whispered its ancient secrets, the crew of Steelbone felt the stirring of hope. Old Marek's tales had not only illuminated the past, but had ignited a fire within them, a fire to reclaim their future from the wreckage of history, to face the Warden's wrath, and to protect the fragile heart of their drifting city. The night deepened, but so did their resolve. For in the stories of old, they found the strength to navigate the storm ahead, and in the bonds forged by shared trials, they discovered a family not born of blood, but of survival and unyielding hope. And as the lamp's glow dimmed against the encroaching darkness, one question lingered in the air, unspoken but ever present. What sacrifices must they make to keep the light alive? The answers lay beyond the horizon, where the sea waited vast, merciless, and full of whispers. The voyage was far from over. As the scavenger vessel eased into the dock, the familiar scent of rust and burning oil filled the air, mingling with the faint, acrid temps of the sea's poison. Kael stood at the prow, eyes scanning the labyrinth of scrap towers and makeshift stalls where merchants hawked their wares to desperate buyers. Tonight, they sought not just parts, but secrets, the kind that could tip the precarious scales of their survival. Silver was waiting, a silhouette framed by the glow of a sputtering sign advertising rare finds and salvage. Her figure was lean yet purposeful, cloaked in layered dark fabrics that concealed more than just her identity. Pockets bulged with curious trinkets, scavenged relics, and bits of machinery that caught the dim light. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the crew as they disembarked, a faint, knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Kael," she greeted, voice smooth yet edged with the coldness of a blade. "I hear you're chasing ghosts beyond the forbidden waters." Kael's jaw tightened. "And you have what we need." Silver gestured to a nearby metal table cluttered with an assortment of parts, shimmering coils, fractured circuit boards, and strange mechanical components that hummed faintly with latent power. "I have what you need, yes, but nothing comes free in these waters." Myra stepped forward, fiery eyes narrowing. "What's your price, Silver? We don't have time for games." The merchant's smile deepened, enigmatic and unsettling. "Information is currency, and trust even more so. I can give you the parts to keep your ship running and the knowledge to navigate the dead zones. But in return, I need a favor, something you can't refuse once you hear it." Kael exchanged a glance with his second in command. The crew's unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Could they risk the unknown for survival? Joran knelt beside the table, his fingers tracing the delicate engravings on a small artifact Silver had produced from her satchel. The object's intricate gears whispered of ancient technology, the kind that might unlock secrets no one else dared to touch. This could be tied to the artifact we seek." Joran murmured, eyes wide behind cracked lenses. "If Silver's intel is accurate, it might reveal the artifact's true purpose." Lena, ever the calming presence, stepped forward to tend to a shallow cut on Kael's hand, reminding everyone of the tangible costs of their quest. "We need to be careful," she said softly. "Trust is fragile here." Negotiations stretched into the night, the flickering neon casting long, uncertain shadows on weathered faces. Silver's terms were steep, and while her parts could mean the difference between life and death, the crew could not ignore the shadow of doubt she cast. Was she a friend or a foe, an ally or a trap? As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Silver gathered her wares and slipped away into the maze of scrap and steel, leaving behind a crew burdened with difficult choices. Their journey was far from over, and the cost of survival was proving higher than any of them had imagined. Kael stood on the deck, watching the horizon with a fierce, bittersweet determination. The bargain with Silver was made, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. Trust would be their greatest weapon and their deadliest liability. "We move at first light," Kael declared, voice steady despite the storm of doubts within. "Prepare yourselves. The sea isn't done testing us yet." And with that, the scavengers of Steelbone braced themselves for the next chapter of their voyage, where every choice could mean salvation or ruin. And the true nature of their enemy might still be hidden in the shifting shadows. The sea whispered its endless toxic secrets, and the city of scrap awaited their return, fragile but unbroken. The air was thick with the metallic temps of engine oil and stale air, punctuated only by the faint hum of the failing city behind them. "This recording," Joran whispered, his voice trembling slightly as he adjusted the cracked glass of his spectacles. "It's from before the Warden became what he is now." Kael leaned closer, the lines etched deep on his weathered face, softening for a moment. The flickering images showed a man younger and less menacing, clad not in the patchwork armor of tyranny but in a simpler uniform, standing on the shores of the toxic sea with a look of solemn duty. "He was a guardian once," Joran continued, voice thick with awe and sadness, "charged with protecting the balance of this sea, keeping the mechanical beasts and scavenger factions from tearing it apart." Kael's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, the weight of his own burdens pressing down on him. So what happened? The holoslate crackled, revealing flashes of a devastating storm, wrecked settlements, and the growing chaos that followed. The man they now called the Warden had lost everything: his family, his faith in humanity, and eventually his purpose. His descent into paranoia and control was laid bare, a tragic fall from protector to tyrant. He wasn't always the enemy, Joran reflected quietly. He became what he hated to stop a greater destruction. Kael closed his eyes briefly, memories of loss and guilt flooding him. It doesn't excuse what he's done, but it makes this fight harder. Up on deck, Mira's fiery hair whipped in the acrid wind as she stood sentinel, her sharp gaze fixed on the horizon where dark clouds churned with the promise of another toxic storm. The tale of the Warden's past stirred a storm inside her as well, a mix of anger at the man's tyranny and a reluctant pity for the broken soul beneath the armor. "He's still a threat," she muttered to herself, tightening her grip on her weapon. But maybe there's more to this than just black and white. Back below, Lena moved quietly, her hands steady and warm as she applied a healing salve to the worn skin on Kael's forearm. The soft glow of the lantern cast gentle shadows across her sun-kissed face, her presence a balm to the captain's restless spirit. "You carry too much alone," she said softly, her voice a whisper amid the mechanical creaks of the ship. "Even the strongest need a hand sometimes." Kael looked up, meeting her steady eyes, the vulnerability he rarely showed flickering briefly before he masked it with resolve. "I'm learning," he admitted. Outside the ship, the Warden stood silhouetted against the blood-red glow of his fortress, the patchwork armor of metal plates clinking softly with each measured step. His glowing red lenses scanned the toxic horizon, a sentinel of destruction born from loss and obsession. His shadow stretched long across the jagged scrap that formed the heart of his dominion, a constant reminder of the cost of fear and control. As the crew absorbed the weight of his story, a silent understanding passed among them. Their enemy was not a simple villain, but a man fractured by tragedy, a mirror of the very fears that haunted their own hearts. The journey ahead was no longer just a battle for survival, which was a test of their courage to face not only the mechanical beasts and treacherous seas, but the complex shadows within themselves and their adversaries. Kael stood on the deck, the wind tugging at his worn coat as he gazed toward the distant fortress. "We'll have to be smarter than ever. More than just fighters, we need to be understanding, even if it costs us." Mira stepped beside him, her fierce green eyes burning with renewed determination. "Then let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes." The toxic sea churned beneath them, endless and unforgiving, but within the crew stirred a fierce, bittersweet determination to press on. The Warden's shadow loomed large, but so did the hope that even in darkness, survival and, perhaps, redemption was possible. Their voyage was far from over. In fact, it was about to enter its most perilous and revealing chapter yet. Kael stood rigid, his lean frame tense, eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows as he faced the figure seated opposite him, shadows playing over the worn lines etched into his weathered face. The dim light from a flickering bulb cast a sickly yellow hue over the cramped space, illuminating the scattered tools and scraps of machinery that littered the room, symbols of their desperate fight for survival. "You lied to us," Kael said quietly, voice low but cutting through the silence like a blade. "You've endangered all of us. All of Steelbone." The accused crew member, a familiar face once trusted without question, avoided Kael's piercing gaze. Sweat beaded on their brow despite the coolness of the metal walls, hands clenched into fists that trembled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I did what I had to," the voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what it means out there. The Warden's reach is longer than you think." Mira's fiery red hair was a stark contrast to the cold metal as she burst into the cabin, her green eyes blazing with fury. "Enough," she snapped, voice sharp as a blade. "We can't afford traitors in our midst. If you wanted to protect us, why keep this secret?" Her words hung in the air, charged with accusation and heartbreak. The room seemed to shrink, breaths catching as the crew wrestled with the crushing weight of betrayal. Joran remained in the shadows, his slender frame hunched over, cracked glasses reflecting the dim light as he struggled to reconcile the fractures in their fragile family. His quiet voice broke the silence, hesitant yet resolute. "Trust is the only thing that keeps us alive out there. If we lose it, what are we?" Lena moved swiftly among them, her soft features and sun-kissed skin a balm against the harshness of the moment. She laid a gentle hand on the betrayer's shoulder, then on Kael's arm, her voice steady and warm. "Pain cuts deep, but it can also heal. We must decide whether to let this wound fester or bind us closer together." Grab's scarred face was set in a grim expression, his broad shoulders rigid with the weight of the revelation. "We've faced worse dangers than this, but none cut so close. If we fracture now, the Warden wins without lifting a finger." The toxic sea roared beyond the vessel's hull, a constant reminder of the peril that awaited them. Yet it was the storm within their own ranks that threatened to sink them first. Kael's mind raced, memories of past losses flashing unbidden, the family he had failed, the promise he'd made to protect this new one. His trust issues, his stubbornness to bear the burden alone, now threatened to shatter everything he had fought to build. "We'll not let this break us," Kael declared, voice stronger now, tempered with the bitter knowledge of what was at stake. "But we must be honest, and we must be united. If anyone else harbors secrets, now is the time to speak." The crew exchanged glances, the fragile threads of their found family strained but not yet severed. Tess, the young scout, stepped forward, her agile frame silhouetted against the faint light filtering through the porthole. "We survive because we trust each other," she said quietly, determination hardening her youthful features. "We can't let fear drive us apart." Mira exhaled sharply, the fire in her eyes dimming to a flicker of reluctant acceptance. "I'll watch the shadows. No one slips through on my watch." Joran nodded, pushing himself from the shadows. "And I'll keep searching for answers. About the artifact, about the Warden, and about us." Lena offered a small, hopeful smile. "We're battered but not broken. Let's heal together." Outside, the endless toxic sea churned, indifferent to the struggles of the floating scrap city and its desperate crew. Inside, the echoes of betrayal still reverberated, but so too did the nascent sparks of resilience. Kael's gaze hardened, resolve stealing within him. The journey ahead was more perilous than ever. Not only would they face the Wardens, mechanical beasts, and the sea's deadly embrace, but also the scars left by one of their own. The cost of survival was steep, and the bonds of found family fragile. Yet, in this crucible of despair, hope still flickered like a stubborn ember, waiting to blaze anew. The chapter closed on a tense note, the crew standing at a crossroads where trust and betrayal collided, their fate hanging precariously in the balance. The question remained, could they overcome the fractures within and unite against the darkness looming beyond the horizon? Or would the shadows of betrayal drag them into the abyss first? The sea whispered its endless secrets, and Steelbone's legacy teetered on the edge of ruin and redemption.